So, antitrust policy notice as usual. The goal of the antitrust policy notice is that we show it at the beginning of every meeting so that everyone can be aligned behind how we approach things, and especially new participants can see how we seek to ensure that everything's done in the open and done in a way that is really equitable and fair to all parties around the world. The roll call today, let's do a brief roll call. So I'll let you know who I can see there. We've got Osaki-san from Fujitsu. We have Shimada-san. Oh, hi, Shimada-san. Hi, Osaki-san. We have Amada-san as well. We have Endo-san. We have Russ. And I think Jim Hutchinson I heard. Is that right?
Yes, thank you, Shane.
Perfect.
Right. Yeah.
Alrighty. So I think that's it for now on who's on the line. I'm going to dash into some of our project news. So we have a few items queued up for announcement this week, which will be pretty big news when they're officially announced. It'll start tomorrow. We'll have some big announcements from tomorrow onward. But before we get to those announcements, which of course I can't talk about right now, we have a few interesting things that came out. So we had an automotive work group meeting on the 29th of October in Open Source Summit Europe in Lyon. The outcomes of that meeting are now available. Those outcomes include all of the slide decks and whatnot. Some pretty interesting case studies from Bosch and Scania about how they're addressing open source software supply chain management, how they're addressing OpenChain specifically. You can get all the slides, you can download them, kick the tires in those, and of course you can reach out to all of the authors via the community at any time. I believe our third meeting is being queued up and we'll formally announce it soon. It'll happen around CES in early January 2020. So Endo-san, I think that you're looking at having the third meeting somewhere in the region of the 7th to 10th of January. Is that correct?
Yes, maybe 9th or 10th. We are planning to the third workshop near the venue of the CES.
And it's great in the OpenChain community. Everyone's so helpful. So with the space for the workshop at the moment, I think Sony is currently the most likely prospect for giving us rooms.
Yeah. Sony-san arranges a very famous casino hotel for meeting.
Which is really nice. So we get to have a great location and we get to not pay for it. It's the best possible deal. Big thank you to Chris Ekron on that from the Sony patent team for helping us out. And huge thank you to Endo-san, who's been organizing our CES activity. This will be more fully announced in the next couple of weeks, but in essence, OpenChain is going to CES. We've got a booth at CES, kindly subsidized by the Automotive Grade Linux project, and we'll have some of our most active contributors like Endo-san manning the booth at the event. We're planning to create some pretty cool OpenChain lanyards and business cards so that anyone attending and helping out is simply just acting as an OpenChain project person rather than representing their company and so on. That's the normal practice, but we're really going to brand it that way for total clarity in CES, where we'll be meeting a lot of new people. Okay, so another item that's important is our OpenChain interview series is continuing with Nicole Papler from TÜV Süd in Germany. The OpenChain interview series has been running now for about 4 months, and we've been building out interviews in Japan and now Germany. Our particular focus in the early days of the OpenChain interviews has been the women in the OpenChain community. One of the goals here is to ensure that we make an open and inclusive community and to reflect the fact that our existing community is very diverse. So much in technology is essentially middle-aged white males that we really want to make a statement that OpenChain is in actuality a very broad, very diverse community, and that all parties from all areas are extremely welcome. And we've been super lucky to have great figures from around our community step forward for the first range of interviews. So Nicole is the latest, and we'll have another couple of interviews, about 1 per month, running throughout 2020. Now, as we build out the interview series, we are going beyond having interviews in Asia and Germany. We want to have interviews in North America. We want to have interviews in Central Asia locations like India. So if you know anyone, male or female, who'd be interested in giving a brief interview about how they engage with OpenChain and why, I would love to hear from you. We want to make this a continuing interview series so that people, when they arrive at the project, can put people's faces to activities and feel the community side of what we do. The OpenChain Japan Workgroup has announced the December meeting schedule. A very exciting event on the 19th of December, one day after the Open Compliance Summit. The 12th OpenChain Japan meeting will take place. This is the all-activity meeting. So OpenChain Japan has 7 subgroups, continually meeting and continually working. But every 2 months we have a all-group meeting. And of course, the 12th meeting will mark 24 months of organized OpenChain Japan meetings. The meeting on the 19th is open to all parties, foreigners as well as Japanese, and language will be in English and Japanese, so it's very accessible. And anyone going to Open Compliance Summit 2019 in Tokyo is encouraged to attend and get to meet some of the great community people we have. Finally, OpenChain is being featured in more and more locations. We've just been featured on the Open UK blog. Open UK is essentially a gateway into the British government, both regional and national, providing an avenue for us to exert influence on decision makers and policy makers in that space. It's another example of OpenChain embedding itself more and more deeply into the open source and software policy dialogue. So those are the news items for now. I mean, we have some other stuff going on, such as in Japan, we're just about preparing to announce a wonderful initiative. We call it the OpenChain Advent Calendar. You'll hear more about this next week. Basically, for 25 days, there'll be 25 articles about OpenChain published from the 1st to 25th of December. Things like that are upcoming. But I wanted to highlight these 4 items of news to kind of show you what we're doing as a project in a direction, a sample. Okay, so if you have OpenChain news, and many of you probably do, please drop me an email. Right now, the main challenge is just collecting all the news and ensuring that it's put out on the main website. We've got so many activities globally. Any help would be super appreciated. A 1 or 2 line email letting me know about something would be really useful. Then I can push it out on our main project, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and website. That's it for the project update. I'm going to move over to the specification now. I'm just going to check. Yes, Mark Giesi's present. Hi, Mark. Welcome on board.
Hello.
Perfect timing.
Sorry, turning late. Meeting over.
No, not at all.
Okay.
So I'll hand over to you now. I'll just note that we also have Fukuchi-san from Sony arrived as well. Okay, will I hand over to you, Mark?
Got it.
Perfect.
So, as many of you know, we're right in the middle, or I should say near the end of the release cycle of the spec. When I say in the middle, we have this last step, which is the public comments stage. And that's where we sent the spec draft out to a much broader audience, looking for others who might be interested in, that have interest in compliance, to give one last opportunity for them to look at the spec. Oftentimes what happens is we get a few good comments or pieces of feedback, and we make small little edits to the spec potentially, which we have already. In the slides, you can see that the URL is the current URL for the current version. We are counting up by what we call release candidates. So we're up to release candidate 3. That means when we started the public comment session, we received a bunch of little comments from the community, the larger community, and they've been progressively added to release candidate 1, 2, and now we're at 3. We will typically receive other more major pieces of feedback, which we will not incorporate into this version, but we'll queue that up for the next major revision of the spec, which will commence in January of 2020. So we have about 15 to 20 days left in the public comments stage. And again, anybody who wants to look at the spec and have additional comments about it, please feel free. One thing to note about this version of the spec is that it will not really require anybody who's already conforming to the 2.0 version to change anything, because pretty much the core has stayed the same. We have done two things, right? I think everybody's well aware that we are trying to submit this to the ISO organization, the International Standards Organization, to get an ISO stamp of approval. So we had to put it in a certain format, which it's in today. And then we made certain clarification comments based on people's feedback looking at the 2.0 spec. And then at the end of this public comments session, we'll freeze it for 14 days just to make sure people have an opportunity to see it before it officially goes out. And then we will probably release it around the 17th of December as being final. And then hopefully we will hear back around that time or shortly after from the ISO organization. And that's where we're at. Any comments? Any other additional comments or feedback on the spec?
I just wanted to make a brief comment. I've seen some of the public feedback, and it's been really interesting, really useful. And I just wanted to comment, Mark, you've been just fantastic in addressing it and keeping us on track with making sure that the version of the spec going into ISO is perfectly equivalent to the existing standard we've got, and creating an inclusive atmosphere so that all types of parties are feeling free to contribute ideas and thoughts, some of which, of course, will feed into the next version of the spec. This is a very difficult balance, and I think you've hit a perfect note. And from what I've seen, we're looking well on track to having our ISO draft ready, and it maps perfectly onto the existing standard. So that's no small task, and you've been handling it incredibly well. Thanks so much, Mark.
Thank you for your feedback there. But again, yes, you're right, Shane. We've had this opportunity to get small little pieces from a broader audience, such as the SPDX group. They wanted to update their definition of SPDX. And we also got some additional comments from the Software Free Conservatory, and we made slight little modifications accordingly.
So we've got representatives from companies like Fujitsu and Toyota and Sony on the line. Is there anything we can help you in Japan with your review of the spec? Is there anything we can do to assist in your review of the content and making sure you're comfortable with it?
Hi, this is Tomosaki from Fujitsu. And just one point that after you make the one version of the ISO that was just not the international ISO, but the lower standard, what will be the future of the official ISO that will need the agreement with each country's representatives, like 2022 or 2023? What timing you are expecting after the first step?
It's a very good question, Osaki-san. So the good news is that the process we are taking into ISO is a special process. Instead of country-by-country review and edit, the process we are going to use is for existing finished standards. So we're going to use something called the Publicly Available Specification Process, the PASS process. And that's a special high-speed process which does not require country-by-country review. The pass process is designed for existing adopted industry standards that will be formalized with an ISO number. So because OpenChain is already finished, it's already adopted in the market, it's a de facto or in practice standard. And de facto standards can enter ISO through the pass process and become an ISO standard without the country-by-country review, and the process takes between 3 and 9 months. So OpenChain will be very shortly submitting into the ISO pass process, and therefore we expect to be an ISO standard in the first half of 2020. So this is a very different process to traditional ISO processes. The traditional process takes between 36 and 50 months. So if we were doing that now, we could expect to be a standard in 2023, 2024. But because we're going through PASS, because it will not have country-by-country discussions, we will be a standard by first half 2020. This process is used often for existing standards. So one good example is that entities who have an existing standard which is widely adopted use this process to ensure the existing standard is formalized as an ISO number. I believe that Microsoft used this process for OpenXML. They had OpenXML as a de facto standard, then they had it as a local or regional standard with ECMA, and then they had it as an ISO standard. But the path from de facto standard to ISO standard is very quick using the pass process. So very short version, we will not have country-by-country review. The standard is already finished. All we're doing is formatting it for ISO, and it will go through this high-speed process via Joint Technical Committee 1. Does that make sense, Osaki-san?
Yeah, I thank you very much for the schedule. And additional question that I have is that recently I sent an email to the specification mailing list that I sent to Mark that so which standard the OpenChain will be belonging to, like ISO 9001 something that related number or something, and what timing that category will be decided at the timing of ISO pass or just in a final timing of the standardization that you said in 2023 or 24? Which when is that will be decided?
Just to clarify, we will be an ISO standard. We will be finished by the first half of next year. We will not take until 2023 or 2024. The long time.
Yeah, I did that. ISO pass process will be the first half of the next year. Yes.
Yeah.
That's it.
So the final decision of where we fit into the ISO portfolio, my understanding is that this will happen in Joint Technical Committee 1. So basically, we submit to Joint Technical Committee 1, and then they will fit us into an existing category in ISO. So I believe this will be done as part of the submission process. I don't think we will be deciding it directly ourselves, though our past submitter organization might make a suggestion. So we should have news about that in the next 2 months. But right now, I don't know.
So you say that the portfolio will be decided, the category will be decided within the ISO pass process, not the real ISO standard process. Is that understand?
That's right. Everything we do will be done through the pass process of ISO. We will not be using any part of the traditional process.
Okay, I understand. And that's all for the question.
Really good questions, Osaki-san, and important questions. So, I mean, just to recap for everyone, we'll be going through a very much a high-speed process because there's no editing needed of our draft. The only editing we're doing here on the project side is to make sure that we haven't made anything confusing and we haven't made any mistakes. But the actual standard will have no editing in ISO. It will go through the pass submission process, the high-speed process for existing standards only, and everything that happens, like for instance our category in ISO, will be decided through the pass process paperwork. So everything will happen very quickly in just a few months, and it will be designed to basically just slot our existing standard, complete and finished, into the existing portfolio areas of ISO. Now, of course, we're unlikely to have any surprising allocations. Like, for instance, we're probably just going to fit into the category of, let's say, software and a subcategory there. But I will keep everyone very much updated on progress as we go. So, any further questions for us?
Shan-san, I heard SPDX also intends to become the ISO. So this issue is already publicly or only the discussion inside the community?
A really good question. Okay, so the big picture here is that the Linux Foundation is collaborating with another foundation called the Joint Development Foundation. And the Joint Development Foundation is basically a project to connect open source and standards. The Joint Development Foundation will become a pass submitter, so it will become a high-speed standardization submitter. This will be announced as an ongoing project in a month or so. What will happen is that OpenChain is the first standard through JDF. So we'll be the first ISO standard from Linux Foundation going through the Joint Development Foundation pass submitter. The second standard going through will probably be SPDX. And to Endo-san's point, right now SPDX 2.2 is complete and ready. It just needs an ISO version. So in the next month or so, you can expect Kate talking to the SPDX community and arranging for the ISO draft of SPDX 2.2. The situation is that Linux Foundation, people like Kate and myself, we're very much ready to see SPDX put through Joint Development Foundation and to become an ISO standard. The communication with the broader SPDX community will be in essentially talking through how SPDX 2.2 is formatted for ISO and giving everyone a little bit of time to look at it. OpenChain will submit very soon to ISO. SPDX is probably more along the lines of 3 to 6 months before submitting because they need to do their ISO draft. The community as a whole has not been focusing on the ISO draft yet. So to Endo-san's point, Linux Foundation is ready to begin the process. The community will need to do an ISO draft review. So SPDX will have to do the same as OpenChain. It's more than an idea, but the process has not yet begun. My guess is you can expect SPDX to be an ISO standard about 3 or 4 months after OpenChain. So let's say OpenChain is an ISO standard in May next year. You can expect SPDX to be an ISO standard around August.
I got this. Thank you.
You're welcome. And of course, I'm talking about Linux Foundation and standards. OpenChain is the first, SPDX will be the second, but you can expect a lot of standards from Linux Foundation in the future. We have a lot of de facto standards, and we're going to make a lot of these into formal standards. Just as a guiding principle, Linux Foundation, of course, is very cognizant, very aware of all the standards around the world, and our goal is not to duplicate standards, but to ensure that in new areas, in exciting areas of new technology, or in areas where there's a market gap, and we have a de facto standard, that standard can become a formal standard, and it can fit even more easily into global usage. So in other words, we're seeking to help the global standard community in cutting edge areas and in areas where there's a gap between existing standards. So we're looking at the exciting process of deciding where we can fill in gaps and where we can help with cutting edge technology standards.
Yeah, Shen-san?
Yeah.
This is Fukuchi, and I just want to say many thanks to Mark-san and you to bring up this great work. And from me, I don't have any comments on to clarify this standard, the draft. Thank you very much for two.
Thank you, Fukuchi-san. It's very kind of you. And it's appreciated very much how you go back every time and you keep everyone informed about what's going on. Your work is terrific and much appreciated. Yourself and Endo-san and Osaki-san are always working hard to spread the word. And without your work, we wouldn't have so many companies in Japan and across Asia helping us at this stage. Alrighty. So
Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. We're on to any other business. Are there any other business items you would like to cover today? Okay. It sounds like that's it. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you, Mark, for presenting the spec. Thank you for the great questions, everyone. I'll talk with you on the first Monday call, or I'll see you face-to-face soon.